Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Alex. Today's case is about a man who spent 11 years trying to conquer Everest, brought his wife along against her will, and never once made it to the top. What happened up there was brutal, but it started long before they ever left home. It was May 3rd, 2016. The southeast ridge of Everest was sitting under this pale, almost glassy sky. No wind, no clouds, just this eerie stillness that made the whole place feel like it was holding its breath. We're talking 29,032 feet above sea level. The air up there has about a third of the oxygen you'd breathe standing in your driveway. And the cold. It's not like regular cold. It doesn't sting or bite. It just presses into you, slow and heavy, like the mountain is quietly reminding you that you don't belong there. Reeve Callum was 41. He sold commercial real estate in Denver, office buildings and retail spaces. The kind of deals that drag on for months and pay well when they finally close. He was good at his job, organized and persistent. The type of guy who didn't let things go once he had decided he wanted them. And for over a decade, what he wanted was Everest. It started around 2005 when he read a book about the 1996 disaster, the storm that killed 8 people in a single night. Most people read something like that and think, absolutely not, never, no chance. Reeve read it and got obsessed. He started training seriously within a year. He did Rainier first, then Denali, then a couple of peaks in South America to get some real high-altitude experience under him. By 2009, he had his first Everest permit, and he was ready, or at least he thought he was. That first attempt ended at Camp 3, around 23,500 feet. A storm rolled in fast, and the team made the call to turn around. It was the right call. Conditions were deteriorating, and pushing through would have been reckless. Reeve knew that. He accepted it. But he came home quieter than Lena expected, and within a few weeks he was already researching the next permit cycle. She noticed that. The way he couldn't just let it sit. He went back in 2013. That attempt got further, all the way to the South Col, at around 26,000 feet, right at the edge of the death zone. His climbing partner started showing signs of the pulmonary edema, and they had to descend. No debate, no hesitation. You don't push someone with fluid in their lungs. But Reeve had been so close. He could see the route above him. He knew exactly what he would have done differently if things had just lined up slightly better. And that thought, that he could have made it. That's the kind of thought that gets into a person and doesn't leave. By the time he started planning the 2016 attempt, Everest wasn't just a goal anymore. It was something he felt he was owed. Lena Callum was 37. She taught PE at a high school outside Denver, the kind of teacher kids actually liked, the one who made gym class feel less like punishment. She ran half marathons on weekends, hiked regularly, had done a few technical climbs with Reeve over the years. Nothing extreme, just enough to know she wasn't afraid of being outdoors and uncomfortable. She was genuinely fit and genuinely capable. But here's the thing. There's a difference between capable and high altitude ready, and that gap is enormous on a mountain like Everest. Lena had never been above 14,000 feet before this trip, not once. She and Reeve had been together for 12 years. She knew who he was. She knew about the obsession, had watched it grow through both failed attempts, had seen what it did to him when he came home empty-handed. She wasn't naive about any of it. And when he started talking about 2016, she didn't immediately say no. She asked questions. She wanted to understand what she was actually signing up for. What she got back were answers designed to reassure her rather than inform her. The guides handle everything. The acclimatization process takes care of the altitude issue. Thousands of people have done this. She was in better shape than most of them. Every concern she raised, he had a response ready, and his responses were confident and detailed because he'd been living in this world for a decade, and he genuinely believed what he was saying. He wasn't lying to her. He was just filtering everything through 11 years of wanting this so badly that the risks had stopped feeling real to him. She pushed back twice in a meaningful way, and both times. He didn't just dismiss her, he dismantled her. The first time was during the planning phase, when she sat down with him and said clearly that she didn't think she had the experience for something like this. He pulled out his training schedule, his research, his notes on the acclimatization process, and walked her through all of it until her concern felt uninformed rather than valid. The second time was a few weeks before they left. She told him she wanted to pull out. She told him she wanted out. He reminded her the permit was already paid, the flights were booked, the gear was sitting in their garage. Months of training, all of it wasted if she backed out now. She didn't bring it up again after that. By the time they landed in Kathmandu, the decision had been made for her in every practical sense, and she knew it. They arrived at base camp in mid-April 2016. Base camp sits at around 17,600 feet, which sounds high until you realize it's basically the starting line. From there, the actual climb is still over 11,000 feet above you. It's a strange place, a sprawling collection of tents and gear spread across a glacier, loud with the sound of ice shifting underneath, cold even in the middle of the day. The altitude hits you the moment you arrive. Not dramatically, not like a wall, more like someone turned the volume down on your body. Everything takes a little more effort than it should. Walking between tents leaves you slightly breathless. You sleep badly the first few nights no matter how fit you are. For Reeve, base camp felt familiar. He'd been here twice before. He knew the rhythms of it, knew what to expect, knew how to pace himself through the adjustment period. For Lena, it was something else entirely. The scale of the mountain above them, the cold, the way the air felt thin, even just sitting still. None of it matched what she'd imagined from the planning phase back home in Denver. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't ready to quit, but something shifted in her during those first few days at base camp. Some quiet recalibration of what she'd actually gotten herself into. She kept it to herself mostly. Reeve was in his element, and she didn't want to be the one who couldn't handle it. The acclimatization process takes weeks. You go up to a higher camp, spend a night or two, come back down, rest, go up again, but higher this time, come back down again. The idea is to give your body time to adapt to the lower oxygen levels gradually. It works, but only if your body responds the way it's supposed to. The first rotation up to Camp 1, at around 19,900 feet, went okay. Lena had a headache the first night, which is completely normal at that elevation. She felt better by the second day. Reeve was moving well. Things looked fine, and Lena let herself feel cautiously optimistic about it. The second rotation changed things. Camp 2 sits at about 21,300 feet. They reached it in decent time, set up, and that's when Lena's headache came back, but different this time. Heavier, sitting behind her eyes in a way that ibuprofen didn't touch. She wasn't sleeping well either. She'd wake up in the middle of the night feeling like she couldn't pull in enough air, even with supplemental oxygen running. In the mornings, she was nauseous and not eating much. On the fixed lines between camps, she was moving slower than she had been lower down, stopping more frequently to rest. Their Sherpa was watching all of this. He'd been guiding on Everest for years, and he'd seen enough climbers at altitude to know the difference between someone who's adjusting and someone whose body is genuinely struggling. He pulled Reeve aside during that rotation and flagged it, not in an alarmist way, just a straightforward heads up. She's moving slower than I'd expect at this elevation. Her symptoms are worth paying attention to. We should keep a close eye on her going forward. Reeve thanked him and said she was adjusting. Now, here's where I need you to understand something. One of the things that can happen at altitude is called HACE, high altitude cerebral edema. Fluid builds up around the brain because of oxygen deprivation. It starts subtle, a headache that won't quit, nausea, feeling foggy and slow. Easy to write off as just being tired, but it moves fast. Within hours, coordination fails. The person stops making sense when they talk, and then they can't move at all. Without immediate descent, it's fatal, and it can get there in under 12 hours. The person going through it usually doesn't realize how bad it is. They feel off, not dying. And the people around them, especially people who want to believe everything is fine, can convince themselves it's just exhaustion. And that's exactly what was happening to Lena. He wrote in his expedition journal that Lena was having some altitude adjustment issues, but that she was improving. She wasn't really improving. She was just getting through each day and hoping the next one would be better. There were other climbers on the mountain during those rotations, other teams doing the same acclimatization process, crossing paths at the camps, sharing the fixed lines. A few of them noticed Lena, not in a dramatic way, just the way experienced climbers notice things. A pace that's off, a posture that's wrong, someone who looks like they're working harder than they should be at a given elevation. Nobody said anything directly to Reeve. It wasn't their place, but the Sherpa noticed them noticing. When they came back down to base camp for their rest period before the summit push, Lena had lost about 4 pounds in 2 weeks. She was sleeping 12 hours a day and still waking up tired. The altitude had been grinding her down in ways that rest at base camp could only partially fix. She sat with Reeve one evening and told him she wasn't sure she was ready, that she thought maybe she should stay at base camp while he went for the summit, that she'd be there when he came back down. He told her the weather window was closing, and that was true. Weather windows on Everest in May are narrow and unpredictable, and this one looked like one of the better ones forecast for the season. season. He told her she'd feel better once they were moving. He told her the hardest part was already behind her. He told her she'd regret it if she didn't go, that she'd come all this way and she was so close. And this time, she didn't push back. There was nothing left to push back with. He had an answer for everything, and she was too worn down to keep fighting it. She packed her bag. The climb up through Camp 3 into Camp 4 happened over 2 days in late April. Lena struggled on the Lhotse face, the steep ice wall between Camp 3 and Camp 4 that you ascend almost entirely on fixed lines. She was slower than she'd been on any previous rotation, and the Sherpa stayed within arm's reach of her the whole way up. He considered raising it with Reeve again that evening before the summit push. He decided to wait and see how she responded to rest overnight. They left Camp 4 at 11:40 p.m. on May 2nd. Camp 4 sits right at 26,000 feet at the edge of the death zone. The plan was a standard overnight push, leave in the dark, reach the summit around mid-morning, descend back to Camp 4 before the afternoon winds picked up. The forecast showed winds under 20 miles per hour and no precipitation through early morning. 2 other teams were making the same push that night, which gave Reeve confidence. If other experienced teams were going, the window was real. Stepping out of Camp 4 in the dark at that altitude is its own kind of disorienting. The cold hits immediately. Not the manageable cold of base camp, but something sharper and more total. Your headlamp throws a narrow cone of light onto the snow in front of you, and beyond that, there's nothing. Just black sky and the faint shapes of the fixed lines disappearing upward. You can see the lights of other climbers above you, small and distant, moving slowly. The mountain is completely silent, except for the sound of your own breathing inside your oxygen mask, which is loud and rhythmic and becomes the only thing you focus on after a while. Just the next breath, just the next step. The Sherpa stayed close to Lena from the moment they left camp. He'd been watching her for weeks, and he knew she was the variable. Reeve was moving well, steady, controlled, setting a good pace. He stayed 40 to 60 feet ahead of Lena and the Sherpa for most of the ascent, which wasn't unusual. That's just how pace differences play out on a fixed line. You move at your own speed, and the rope keeps you connected to the route. You could feel it in the way he moved, locked in, pulling forward, like he'd already decided how the night was going to end. The first hour was manageable. Lena was slow, but she was moving. She wasn't talking much, which at that altitude with an oxygen mask on is completely normal. You conserve everything. The Sherpa checked on her every few minutes, a hand on her shoulder, watching her foot placement, watching the way she was holding her ice axe. She was working hard, but she was working. There were moments in that first hour where it seemed like she was going to be okay, like maybe Reeve had been right all along. By around 1 a.m., they were above 27,500 feet, and that feeling was gone. Lena's pace had dropped off in a way that wasn't just tiredness. She was stopping more, not pausing to catch her breath the way climbers do, but stopping in a way that looked involuntary, like her body was refusing to continue, and she was having to negotiate with it to start again. She was leaning forward on her ice axe more than she should have been, using it as a crutch rather than a tool. The Sherpa radioed Reeve twice in that hour to flag her pace. Reeve acknowledged both times and kept moving. At around 2 a.m., approaching 28,000 feet and getting close to a section called the balcony, Lena stopped walking. She didn't stumble. She didn't grab for the fixed line. She just stopped and sat down in the snow like she'd decided to take a break, except she hadn't decided anything. Her body had just stopped. The Sherpa was at her side in seconds. Her oxygen mask was on, flow rate was normal. He spoke to her, she answered, but it was slow and fragmented, like she was translating from another language before she could respond. He asked her what month it was. She got it wrong. He asked her where they were. What she said back didn't make sense. He radioed Reeve immediately. Reeve came back down to them. He could see she wasn't right, that was obvious. But what he said was that she needed a few minutes, that she'd pushed hard and needed to catch her breath and stabilize. He adjusted her oxygen flow himself, gave her water, crouched next to her in the snow, and talked to her quietly. He waited. The Sherpa told him they needed to go down immediately. Reeve said a few more minutes. Think about that for a second. They're at 28,000 feet. Lena can't tell him what month it is. A guide with years of experience on this mountain is telling him they need to move right now, and Reeve is crouched in the snow, waiting for her to stabilize, because he can't bring himself to accept what's right in front of him. Those 23 minutes, that's what the GPS data showed later. 23 minutes of no movement at that position, were 23 minutes of Reeve crouched next to Lena in the snow, talking to her, genuinely trying to help her. She was sitting upright, but her head kept dropping forward. She'd lift it when he spoke to her, and then it would drop again. The Sherpa stood a few feet away, watching the sky, watching her, watching Reeve, knowing that the conversation he needed to have wasn't getting through. Around Around 2:30 a.m., a second team came through on their way up. They were moving at a good pace, clearly well acclimatized, and one of the lead climbers slowed when he saw Lena sitting in the snow. He stopped. He looked at her for a moment, then looked at Reeve and said she needed to descend. Not as a question, not as a suggestion, as a statement from someone who had seen this before and knew exactly what he was looking at. Reeve said they were handling it. The climber held his gaze for a second, then turned and kept moving with his team. By 3 a.m., Lena could not stand on her own. The Sherpa and Reeve got on either side of her and lifted her to her feet. The Sherpa on her left, Reeve on her right, both of them clipped to the fixed line, both of them taking her weight while she tried to get her legs under her. And she was trying. Her legs were moving, but they weren't coordinating. She was placing her feet in the wrong spots, crossing them, her crampons scraping against the ice at wrong angles. Every few steps, she'd lean her full weight into Reeve's side without warning, and he'd have to brace hard to keep them both upright. They started going down, slow and difficult, but moving. The Sherpa set the pace, careful, deliberate, one section at a time. He was managing both of them now, watching Lena's feet, watching the fixed line, watching the terrain below them. Reeve was focused on Lena, keeping her upright, talking to her, trying to keep her engaged enough to keep her feet moving. For about 30 minutes, it almost seemed like it was going to work. They were covering ground, not fast, but consistently. Lena's legs were unreliable, but they were going. The sky above them was still clear. The wind was still manageable. Camp 4 was below them and getting closer with every step. And for a moment, just a moment, it felt like they might actually get her down. Then, at around 27,600 feet, the wind changed. Not gradually, it just shifted, direction and intensity at the same time, like someone had thrown a switch. Within about 15 minutes, visibility dropped to almost nothing. 25 feet in front of you, maybe 30 if you were lucky. A localized whiteout. These happen on the upper ridge without much warning. The weather up there operates on its own logic regardless of what any forecast says. It wasn't unusual, it was just the worst possible timing. The fixed lines were still there. They were still clipped in. But navigating a technical descent in near zero visibility while half carrying someone whose legs aren't working is a completely different problem than doing it in clear condition. Every step had to be deliberate. Every foot placement had to be checked. The margin for error had basically disappeared. And then Reeve made the last bad decision of his life. He started moving faster. The Sherpa felt the pace change immediately and told him to slow down. Reeve kept moving. The logic isn't hard to follow. They were exposed, the weather was getting worse, Camp 4 was below them, and every minute they spent on that face was another minute at risk. But Lena couldn't move faster. She was already at the absolute limit of what she could physically do, and he was pulling her forward at a pace she couldn't match. There's a traverse on that section of the descent, a narrow shelf of snow and ice that cuts across a steep face. You follow the fixed line across it, and on the downhill side, the slope drops away hard, around 45 to 50 degrees before it goes nearly vertical below. In good conditions, with a body that's working, it's manageable. In a whiteout, moving too fast, half carrying someone whose coordination is gone, it's a completely different situation. Lena's crampon caught on a lip of ice. It was a front point snag, the kind of thing that happens all the time on technical terrain, and that a functioning climber corrects automatically, without thinking, because the reflex is just there. But Lena's reflexes weren't there anymore. She lurched sideways, hard and sudden, her full body weight going in the wrong direction. Reeve was holding her right arm, and the force pulled him off balance before he could do anything about it. The Sherpa had her left side, but the pull was lateral and sharp and happened in under a second, and his grip broke. Both Reeve and Lena came off the fixed line. The Sherpa's anchor held. He stayed on the mountain. The slope at that section runs steep before it drops into near vertical terrain below. They didn't fall straight down. They slid first, accelerating fast on the ice. And in the whiteout, the Sherpa could track them for maybe 2 or 3 seconds before they disappeared. Below that, traverse is a rock band, a broken section of exposed rock and ice that cuts across the face. At the speed they were moving by the time they reached it, the impact would have been immediate and unsurvivable. Not a long fall into open air, a fast, violent slide into something solid in the dark in a whiteout, with no one close enough to do anything about it. The Sherpa heard nothing after they disappeared, no sound from below, just the wind pressing against him on that narrow shelf of ice where he stood alone. He stood there for a moment, then he radioed base camp. The time on the log was 3:47 a.m. Base camp acknowledged within 2 minutes. The coordinator told him to get back to Camp 4 and stay on the radio. Then he started moving down. There was nothing anyone could do that night, moving on that section of the mountain in a whiteout. In the dark, without knowing exactly where they'd gone, it would have just put more people at risk with no realistic chance of helping. The two teams that had been been ahead of them on the summit push came back through Camp 4 in the early morning hours and were told what had happened. The Sherpa made it back to Camp 4 on his own, arriving around 5:30 a.m. He had frostbite developing on 2 fingers of his left hand. He gave a full account to the expedition coordinator over the radio and then sat in the tent and waited for the weather to clear. The search team went out at first light on May 4th, once conditions cleared enough to move. They had to descend past the rock band using Reeves' last GPS coordinates as a reference, on terrain with no fixed lines. It took about 2 hours to reach the location from Camp 4. They found both bodies on a lower snowfield, roughly 800 feet below the traverse. Lena was face down, partially covered by wind-drifted snow. Reeve was about 12 feet from her. The fall took them both. Bringing bodies down from that altitude is an enormous undertaking, dangerous for anyone attempting it, logistically brutal, and in many cases, simply not possible. The Callums were left on the mountain. What the search team brought back was the equipment: Reeves' GPS watch, which had been logging their position through the night, the Sherpa's radio, with every transmission time-stamped and recorded, Lena's oxygen equipment, which showed her flow rate had been correctly set the entire time. The gear hadn't failed her. The GPS data placed their last recorded position near the traverse, close enough that combined with the Sherpa's account, there was no question about where they'd gone off the line. The radio logs filled in everything else. Every transmission, every timestamp, every call the Sherpa made that night. Together, they gave a clear picture of what the descent had looked like hour by hour. The expedition debrief documented both deaths as consistent with a high-altitude fall. For Lena, the symptoms in the hours before, the confusion, the loss of coordination, the inability to stand, pointed strongly toward advanced HACE, though without a formal examination that stayed an assessment rather than a confirmed diagnosis. For Reeve, there was nothing to suggest he'd been compromised before the fall. He went off that line because he was holding on to his wife when she went, and he didn't let go. The case was closed through standard expedition documentation, and the Sherpa's account matched everything the recovered data showed.